we got to address the money. We have to have a form of capital at the base layer of this global economy that no one can manipulate, that is sound, that is backed by math and energy, and that is Bitcoin. We need a neutral reserve asset. And if there was no Bitcoin, I would think that gold should take that place. But because Bitcoin exists and it takes us into the digital global economy, it settles instantly around the globe in a matter of minutes, and can be verified much more easily than gold. And it is neutral. Again, no country controls it. So I think the future is Bitcoin, and that goes for individuals, companies, and nation states.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. The guests just keep getting better and better here on Little by Little, and I'm so excited to bring on Natalie Brunell. Natalie is obviously known as a Bitcoin educator. We see her all over Fox News and all over YouTube, but she also has a podcast called Coin Stories, and congratulations, Natalie. It's the #1 Bitcoin podcast out there right now, which is amazing and well-deserved. And of course, you mentioned that you are also a author and a soon-to-be released book called Bitcoin is for Everyone. You're certainly keeping busy. It's great to have you. How are you?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a while. It was so nice to meet you in person in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about that for a moment. You know, I'm an old school guy, Natalie, and I grew up in this industry 35 years this month, where if I couldn't hold it, it really was hard for me to understand, to accept. And it was a lunch I had with you and Mark Moss, two people I hold in high esteem, that kind of pushed me over the edge. Now, I've often told the story of how when I started my company with my father 35 years ago on a wing and a prayer, he said, Andy, I won't let you make the same mistakes that I made as a younger man. We borrowed money from his best friend, $60,000 to Franklin and Miles Franklin. My dad's middle name was Miles. He said, you're going to buy something, some gold, some silver every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was, 35 years ago. I've owned the company for 2 decades. And although my dad's still alive and we talk every day, he won't fire me anymore. I've honored my word, and I bought something every 2 weeks for 35 years, which taught me the laws of compounding, how to make it for you instead of against you. And it was the best gift he's ever given me. But after our lunch with you and Mark, which was 2 years ago, I bought a little bit of Bitcoin every 2 weeks, just a very little bit. And while I am still a hard asset guy at heart, I have understood I've understood the importance of not being married to your own ideology, and you really opened my eyes to that. You and Mark did, and I want to thank you for that. And it's been a neat experience along the way, so thank you. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on here, because the people I talk to every day, most of them probably have the same questions and concerns that I do. I'm going to try to address a few of them, but I couldn't think of anyone better to help educate the way you did me, in a very plain and simple, easy to understand way, just what it's all about and why it's so important. So my gratitude, my appreciation, and I hope people out there listening to this will find some information or some explanation, if you will, the way that I did, and begin their own journey. So without further ado, look, how do you explain Bitcoin and its value proposition to an old school gold bug like myself? I think a lot of the people watching this would fit into that category.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Everything you said is just music to my ears, and it speaks to just how open-minded you are, because transformative technologies can sometimes have significant pushback, and it just goes to show that you are someone who wants to learn, is open to learning, and maybe adopting a new view. And this doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in gold or that you should completely disregard, your previous patterns of investing. But I think that it's really important for people to take the time to study Bitcoin, because it is one of those revolutionary, transformative technologies that only come around maybe once in a lifetime. I think this is a once in a humanity type of invention. So I mean, I think that for gold bugs, who I love, I hold in high regard as well because they are the sound money advocates of the era before Bitcoin. I think that the principles are very, very similar. Bitcoin is a hard asset, just like gold, only it's in digital format, which I think is sort of the obstacle that many people run into because we've never had a digital bearer instrument that is like Bitcoin, that is completely scarce, that isn't replicable, that is completely verifiable, that is globally accessible to everyone. And it's a little bit to wrap your head around. But I always like to, ask people about what was it like when they were first using or learning about the internet? Because Bitcoin is very similar. It is a protocol. It's an open source protocol and a network that all of us can access around the world. And the internet really transformed how all of us not just communicate, but also do business. Most people watching this maybe order things online today as opposed to going to a store physically. They probably send everything via email as opposed to going to a post office. I mean, it literally transformed our lives. But if you would have said that to people in the 90s, they would say, no way. I mean, it was dismissed in newspapers as a passing fad and it's going to have no impact on people more than a fax machine has. And they were clearly wrong. It was a transformative technology. Before that, airplane technology, electricity, a lot of these new technologies were first resisted by the mainstream audience and then all of a sudden embraced. And now we don't even think twice and we take it all for granted. Bitcoin is very, very similar. It allows open access to this monetary protocol that is based on an asset that has no issuer, that is completely decentralized, that is resistant to inflation and manipulation. And it's the one thing that I really think brings us together in terms of the future digital economy to be able to save for the future in a reliable way. Right now, the biggest problem I believe facing all of us is inflation, the destruction of your purchasing power because of central planning and government intervention with the monetary system. So I'm a huge believer in hard, scarce assets, but Bitcoin has outperformed everything and doesn't carry a lot of the risks that I think a lot of the other asset classes do, including gold. So for me, Bitcoin is the solution. But again, I think that people who have diversified portfolios and they love gold, they love real estate, that's okay, but you should at least get off zero and have a little bit allocated to Bitcoin at this point because it is the future of digital capital.
Yeah, and I'm one of those. It's funny. I was chuckling because I started this company with my dad. It's going to age me in 1989. That's before the internet. And I remember my dad coming back from a conference he had in Asia. He said, "Andy, I got the coolest thing. It's called a fax machine." Yeah. And I remember when email came out, and I'm like, "Who would use email? I mean, why not just or text? Why not just call someone?" I am that person that you spoke of. I am that guy that went along kicking and screaming, but I have given in and slowly acclimated to it. But I still am a gold bug at heart. But I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with it. I hope more people will listen and understand this as well, because obviously it has proven itself to be far more than just a passing fad. We'll get more into that in a moment. But so I want you to well, we've heard for a while. In fact, I started talking about this strategic Bitcoin account that had been bantered around for months now. In fact, what caught my attention was the Bitcoin conference I'm sure you spoke at or were there for sure in Tennessee, where President Trump was. And right after Trump spoke, Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming got up on stage and said, we need to revalue the gold held by the Federal Reserve on behalf of the Treasury, held in the gold revaluation account, which is something, a different subject that I've been talking a lot about lately with all the stuff going on in COMEX and the LBMA, but that's for a different interview. But she said to fund the strategic Bitcoin account. So I've been focusing a lot on this since, I don't remember, that was July or August of last year. Talk to me about the new strategic Bitcoin account. I was listening to your podcast last night, which was fantastic. And I understand how you didn't really like the fact that they included XRP, Solana, and Cardano. Give me your thoughts on that, if you would, please.
No, I don't like that they included these other cryptocurrencies because they aren't sound money, and they don't fix what's wrong with our monetary system. And if we're going to invest in speculative cryptocurrencies, then we might as well also put Apple stock and Meta and Tesla shares in a strategic reserve. I just think that that carries a lot of risk. Whereas Bitcoin is a digital commodity, an asset with no issuer, the most powerful computing network in the world, and really does serve as like a digital gold. And to your earlier points about the idea of, how we would finance something like purchasing Bitcoin and revaluing gold potentially, I think that the conversations happening around our nation's gold are so fascinating right now. I recently had Ron Paul on the show, and there's a big question mark about whether we even have the gold in Fort Knox that we claim to, and it hasn't been audited for years and no one has really seen it. But that gold that we have on the balance sheet, it's not marked to market, right? So there's a huge opportunity there, and that's what Senator Cynthia Lummis is sort of proposing, and others as well, that through a simple, accounting update, that we actually revalue the gold and strengthen our balance sheet and potentially use that to purchase Bitcoin. Now, we can actually print money to purchase Bitcoin. And that's something that Michael Saylor has advocated for, that countries can print their currencies, buy Bitcoin, short the currency, long the hard, scarce asset, because again, it will strengthen your balance sheet. Now, I think that what we'll start with is probably a strategic stockpile where we sort of reclassify the Bitcoin that is already owned by the federal government, that has been seized through civil forfeiture and different actions. That will be moved from the Department of Justice to, say, the Treasury, and that will serve as our starting point. But the question of buying, that I think will require an act of Congress. I don't think that there's bipartisan agreement on that right now. And I think that their priority is actually the stablecoin legislation. Why? Because they want to extend dollar dominance, and that's what stablecoins have essentially been doing, but largely in a very opaque way overseas. There are no clear regulations when it comes to stablecoins. The largest stablecoin issuer is overseas in El Salvador, but it's been providing a massive amount of demand for U.S. Treasuries. So obviously they want to do something, because if these stablecoin issuers are buying up treasuries, that provides us a way and an excuse to print more money and go further into debt. So all of these things are very interesting and interconnected. But ultimately, going back to Bitcoin's qualities and properties as a sound asset, we need Bitcoin if we're going to have any chance of getting out of debt. Most people don't realize, and this is why I'm so passionate about financial education, that most money is just debt. It's just IOUs and paper promises. And we've been in such a tremendously fortunate position, being the global reserve currency, to be able to export all of our inflation, but it has crushed the working class. It has crushed our industrial base. And now they're trying to reshore everything, but it's incompatible with us being the global reserve currency and needing to run structural trade deficits, right? So these are the types of things that I think people don't realize, and we're shouting around about the political symptoms of all of this, but really we got to address the money. We have to have a form of capital at the base layer of this global economy that no one can manipulate, that is sound, that is backed by math and energy, and that is Bitcoin. We need a neutral reserve asset. And if there was no Bitcoin, I would think that gold should take that place. But because Bitcoin exists and it takes us into the digital global economy, it settles instantly around the globe in a matter of minutes, and can be verified much more easily than gold. And it is neutral. Again, no country controls it. So I think the future is Bitcoin, and that goes for individuals, companies, and nation states. And I'll be interested to see what this crypto or strategic reserve is, but I really think it should just be Bitcoin.
You make some interesting points. I did an interview with Judy Shelton, and she talks about issuing 50-year treasuries because, to your point, net since 2014, there has been no central bank buying of treasuries. It's actually been selling more than buying. And she said, who wants our treasury anymore? So she said a 50-year treasury backed by gold with stable coins issued on the back of them. So I think a lot of what you're saying is jiving with what I'm hearing. And you make some very interesting and very convincing points, to say the least. Now, here's a question that I have. Some of the others I've had my clients ask me, but this one kind of interests me. And with, I remember when the COMEX came out with a contract, which enabled my company to start taking Bitcoin for precious metals purchases. It could be hedged at that point, more or less. But With Wall Street's involvement in Bitcoin through ETFs, through futures, like the Chicago Board of Trade, the COMEX, custodians, and companies like MicroStrategies, does this strengthen Bitcoin's legitimacy, or does it potentially, to your point, those other cryptos are not really decentralized like Bitcoin is, but having it all held in such a few hands on Wall Street and MicroStrategies and whatnot, does that compromise potentially its decentralization? Is it a good thing, or is it potentially not a good thing, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, look, I think Wall Street's adoption of Bitcoin was largely inevitable, right? They see the best performing asset and they want their cut. So I totally understand it. I generally find companies coming into the space and these massive firms and institutions to be accretive just because it gives people more options, right? The pension funds, if RIAs start recommending Bitcoin, it just provides more and more avenues for the average person, company, pension fund, all of that to invest. But you do raise some really important points, because the idea of concentrating all this Bitcoin with counterparties is a little bit counter to the ethos of Bitcoin, which is that you now have financial sovereignty. And so I think it's really important that we advocate for our policymakers, our lawmakers, to protect the right to self-custody. Not everyone is going to make this decision. A lot of people think it's too intimidating or technical. I want to say on the record that it's not. But there's such a power in being able to take self-custody of this asset, because Bitcoin is a digital bearer instrument. You can take it offline, you can put it in cold storage, and no one can ever confiscate that from you, debase it, inflate it. It can't be hacked. If all of these exchanges go down, or if one of these Wall Street firms decide to all of a sudden, run away with the Bitcoin, that won't impact you. If you have Bitcoin in self-custody, in many ways, I think you're more protected than ever. But I do think that Bitcoin is going to continue to assimilate with the traditional financial system. And again, that means adoption by companies, adoption by Wall Street, adoption by the big banks. The big banks now suddenly want their cut. And many people will choose to go with one of those routes for convenience. If you could just go to your retail bank and start allocating to Bitcoin or borrowing against Bitcoin, I think a lot of people would love to take that option. It sort of legitimizes the whole asset class. I think that BlackRock coming in, for better or for worse, legitimized Bitcoin. And now, the company putting Bitcoin in their model portfolios and basically saying to the world, hey, you should get off zero and have at least a 1% to 2% allocation. That is huge in terms of creating a source of demand for Bitcoin. But one of the things I'm most excited about is that the retail public still has a huge chance to front run all these institutions and nation states. Even though Bitcoin's price has already, exceeded six figures, I know it's pulled back, but it still is very early. And so acquiring Bitcoin now, before it inevitably rises to seven figures, before it is eventually in the central banks around the world, I think it's a huge chance for everyone to start accumulating and dollar cost averaging and having a savings account built and powered by Bitcoin. And I think that that's why we have to get the message out to the retail public, because that's what I'm kind of most concerned about, is the working class being economically empowered. The Wall Street firms are going to be fine whether they invest in Bitcoin or not. But I think that for the retail public, it's so imperative to take the time to study, because it is the most powerful saving technology, in my opinion.
So I hope you understand the questions that I'm going to ask you are, my goal is to educate myself and the people who are watching this, the community that is watching this. I've felt for a very long time, Natalie, I had a guy that worked for me named Andy Hoffman. I don't know if you know who he is or not, but he wrote my newsletter for a long time. And he came to me in 2016 and said, I want to unite the two communities. And we parted ways along the way for various reasons, but he was right. And he was telling me to buy it at $400 of Bitcoin. So I have been trying to unite these two communities for a long time, but I want to really understand it. And I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but it's floating in my head after some of the things that you said. One of the questions I have is, are we to believe that all of the Bitcoin that the United States government received through civil forfeiture, that those who gave it up or had it taken from them because they were criminals or whatever, actually gave the U.S. government the keys to this? And if they didn't, is it accessible by the most sophisticated NSA or whatever? on behalf of the U.S. government, or is it not? You know what I'm saying? If they have this huge stockpile of Bitcoin that they confiscated, I can't imagine that they got the keys for all of that. Is that something that's ever been asked?
I mean, it's definitely a good question, and I don't know the ins and outs of how our own government custodies Bitcoin. You would think that that would be public information. I haven't taken the time to better understand how our government actually accesses all this Bitcoin, because you're right, they would absolutely have to have the keys. If it's not your keys, it's not your coins. If you don't have the keys, you can't access the coins. So that's definitely a question to be had. I would assume that because our government is so closely tied to the large banks in the system, that there is going to be some sort of relationship when it comes to custody. These rules really haven't been established, right? I mean, we've never custodied a digital bearer instrument like Bitcoin. So that's a really good question. I don't know if we're going to end up having a digital Fort Knox, so to speak, for Bitcoin, and who's going to have access to those keys. I would imagine it would be a collaborative multi-sig custody, because absolutely you have to have all of that straightened out. If you're a company right now that's adopting Bitcoin, you have to have a very defined custody solution and who has access to it. And it's not just going to be one person that can run away with all the Bitcoin. You have to kind of decentralize the risk and decentralize it among several parties. And Bitcoin allows for that. I mean, it's truly a powerful technology that you can have on your own on a cold storage wallet just by yourself. Or again, you can create these multi-signature schemes, a 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5 multi-sig or more, to protect the Bitcoin and to make sure that only the people you want to access it can access it. So the question is a little above my pay grade. I'm not exactly sure how the government custodies the Bitcoin. But for example, all of these ETF issuers, they custody with companies like Coinbase. Fidelity created its own custody solution, so it custodies the Bitcoin. And so I think more and more solutions will be coming up as the market adopts this asset. And it is important to kind of pay attention to and keep track of, because the technology evolves very, very quickly, and you want to make sure that you're up to date on all the custody solutions that exist.
So if they confiscated 10 million in Bitcoin from Joe the criminal, and Joe the criminal doesn't give him the keys, there's no way at that. It's just dead. It's dead. Correct?
Well, I'm assuming if they actually confiscated it, then they did have access to the keys. They were able to actually acquire that Bitcoin. I don't think this is a situation where the Bitcoin's just kind of locked up and no one can access it. I think that if they confiscated it, then the U.S. government has access.
Okay. And again, and I'm sorry for asking those challenging questions, but I want to understand it, because
Yeah,
I think I'm good at gold because I intimately understand it.
sure.
And in order to be able to not only talk about it on my channel, but to understand it myself and to help other people, I'd like to
Yeah.
get these burning questions answered. So thank you for your candor. I really do appreciate it. Just a couple more questions, Natalie, and you're awesome. And I love your answers and how thorough they are. Not too long ago, I was reading something about Google Willow chip. I don't know if you've heard of the Google Willow chip. It's a quantum computing processor I'm reading this, that uses qubits to perform calculations that are impossible for classical computers. It was unveiled in December 2024. What caught my attention about the Google Willow chip is the following. Willow can perform computations that would take today's fastest supercomputers an estimated 10 septillion years. I had no idea what a septillion is, so I Googled what is a septillion. It's a cardinal number that is equal to 1 followed by 24 zeros. They can do computations that take normal supercomputers 10 septillion years. How secure is Bitcoin against potential future threats such as quantum computing? Do you ever concern yourself with this? Is there a level of security that people should feel comfortable with if you hold it offline in a Trezor and cold storage? Or is this something that is being addressed right now by the Bitcoin community?
It's a fantastic question. It's something I've explored on my show because I'm fascinated by all of these advancements in high performance computing and AI. So right now, I actually feel really good about Bitcoin's resistance to AI, at least for the time being. Even talking about the Willow chip, it would have to be dozens more qubits more powerful, and that is significant in order to even be able to try to hack the Bitcoin algorithm. SHA-256 is one of the most powerful algorithms protecting Bitcoin. But for those that are really concerned about quantum computing and are following this much more closely, they might recall the speeches and works of people like Andreas Antonopoulos, who's one of the best programmers in the Bitcoin space. And he is not worried because, again, the algorithms protecting Bitcoin are so powerful, but B, Bitcoin can always be upgraded to be quantum computer resistant. So things can be upgraded. It has to happen through consensus, of course. But yes, there is a situation where, for example, Satoshi's wallet, it could be compromised because if the person has passed away, which I think Satoshi is no longer with us, then they would not be able to upgrade to a quantum resistant address, right? So I think that something like that we will see, and this is what Andreas has actually predicted on his broadcast as well, that we will see Satoshi's coins move. Now, I think that could impact the price temporarily, but it isn't something where you're cracking the actual network or protocol. Bitcoin is very, very resistant right now to all the types of quantum computing technologies that exist. I think it's at least 10 years away where we might have some sort of concern. But again, the network can become quantum resistant. And you have to remember that it's not like quantum would just crack Bitcoin. If it gets to the level of Bitcoin, which is the most secure computing network in the world, it would have cracked the encryption for every single banking institution, every government, nuclear codes, all of that. So I hope people put it into perspective that this isn't a situation where you're fine and all the computers, every internet agency is totally okay, but Bitcoin's going to be attacked. No, if quantum cracks that type of encryption, then it's going to crack everything. So we would need to have everything sort of upgraded to that extra level of encryption and protection.
Yeah, it seems like we should probably start moving in that direction across the board.
Yeah.
Last question, Natalie. And again, thank you so much. You're fantastic. And you answer the tough questions with a smile on your face. I appreciate that. And I really say all of this because I want to understand it as well as you do. And I've been paying much closer attention to it. But these are the questions that have been burning a hole through my head. And here's the last one that's an easy one. As I mentioned, I've been trying to bridge the two communities. And I often say, in presentations, I've spoken at the XRP conference before. I don't really understand it, but they asked me to be part of it. So I was there because of this desire to say that we should all be complementary to one another rather than adversarial. In many respects, we see the same problem. It doesn't mean we see the same solution, perhaps, but we see the same problem. And for that reason, I could argue that a portfolio made of both, mixed of both, would be the best alternative, at least in my mind. And that's kind of the path I've taken, largely because of you and Mark and the conversation we had over lunch that opened my eyes to that. But when I think about it, both Bitcoin and gold are seeing ways out of the traditional system. They're both seem to a degree as being independent. They're scarce. They're independent from control. They're decentralized. Do you think there's ever a time where our two communities can come together in this fight and for sound money? Or do you think we're always going to be competitors? Because one of the things I hate, whether it be having someone on my show that talks about Bitcoin and I get people saying, why would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. Or the other way around, talking about gold on a channel where the focus is on Bitcoin or something. And then why would you have that? Shouldn't we all come together and realize that we're really fighting the same fight in many respects? And could it happen in your mind?
Well, there are so many gold bugs that I meet who are now Bitcoiners, and some own both, and some have shifted from gold to Bitcoin. Look, I am a huge believer in free market capitalism. Let the market decide what is the best store of value. I don't think it's my business whether someone allocates a certain percentage to gold or real estate or certain equities or Bitcoin. I think everyone needs to make that very personal decision for themselves based on their risk tolerance, based on their volatility tolerance, and for different reasons. I've actually diversified away from gold and more into Bitcoin because I used to hold more of both together because Bitcoin outperformed gold. And so I saw gold as more of a tool to almost preserve my wealth as opposed to grow it. And as a millennial, I feel behind in this financial system. I feel like I need to turbocharge my financial situation. And Bitcoin is what has allowed me to do that. So I don't criticize people for holding gold. And again, I think it's everyone's personal decision. I don't know why it has to be so adversarial, but I think gold is analog hard money and Bitcoin is digital hard money. And it's just that barrier of the technology shift. I don't think that in the future, the generations that are coming up are going to be as fervent of advocates for something physical like gold when they are working and existing in a digital economy where everything is just like a tap, tap, tap away on their electronic devices. So I see a lot of value to gold, but I think that Bitcoin has improved upon gold. That's why I personally invest in it. I think it's more verifiable. I think that because it's not physical, I can take it around the world with me if I needed to leave and move to another jurisdiction. It just, for me, improves upon the wonderful qualities that gold has had for a really long time. And when it comes to the other cryptocurrencies, I just see a lot of them as a distraction and very speculative, much more similar to digital equities than anything else, because nothing is as decentralized as Bitcoin. Nothing, Satoshi gave us this great gift, right? He created this protocol, gave it away, and didn't take any profit. There's no foundation for Bitcoin. There's no one tweeting who can influence the protocol and is telling people what the direction of it is or pre-mined it for themselves. He created the protocol and just gave it away for all of us to use and access around the globe. And I think that that's really a powerful truth that we need to recognize. This is a system built on math and physics, backed by energy that no one can influence. And when you're looking across the world at other digital tokens, that's not the case. No matter what they say about decentralization, only Bitcoin, through its proof of work protocol and consensus mechanism, is truly decentralized. And I think it's the best technological breakthrough of my lifetime. And I'm so excited about it. So regardless of what you invest in, just take the time to study, be careful in terms of how much risk you're willing to take. And if you're in Bitcoin, don't worry about the ups and downs. Zoom out and look at it as what it is, which is the best performing asset of the decade.
Yeah, I was surprised to see Peter Schiff actually say something positive about Bitcoin for once. So, old dogs do maybe learn new tricks, even I do. So Natalie, you're amazing. Your answers are spot on and you don't miss a beat. How can more people follow you and keep up with all the changes that are happening in the Bitcoin community that you're on top of?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, my big passion is really sharing financial education, because when I learned about Bitcoin, I realized how ignorant I was about how the whole system works. And I took for granted what money actually is and who issues money and why the ability to issue money and inflate is such a big problem. And so I see Bitcoin as this really powerful tool for economic empowerment. I feel so blessed to be doing what I'm doing. I host the show Coin Stories, which has ascended to the top show in the Bitcoin space. I'm very grateful. I wrote a book all last year, huge passion project of mine. It's called Bitcoin is for Everyone. It's for literally everyone. It's for gold bugs. It's for the young, the old, whatever country you're in. It's really about why Bitcoin is such a special tool for savings. And I'm just grateful to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's the pleasure is mine. When does the book come out?
It's scheduled right now for the fall. Hopefully that can get moved up, but right now it'll be in the fall. But you can look it up on Amazon.
Well, congratulations. I started writing a book 2 years ago and I'm about 4 chapters in. So I know how hard it is. You're very impressive, Natalie, on every level. And thanks again for coming on. I hope to do it again with you soon. And I'll keep trying to bridge the gap between these two communities. I think we're much stronger together. So thanks for coming on. And I'm sure people will get a lot out of this. And look forward to picking up where we left off real soon.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.